The more successful you are, the more you have to protect your assets. And today I'm going to walk you through 3 different tiers of asset protection that most asset protection experts will never tell you about. And you're not going to hear this from most people because most asset protection is domestic. Most folks are focused on keeping their eggs in one basket, and that one basket is the country they live in. And so where a lot of people who talk about asset protection trusts, let's just say in the United States, might steer you towards Wyoming, Nomad Capitalist would steer you towards the Cook Islands, for example. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn how we help 7, 8, and 9-figure entrepreneur and investor clients. But let's talk about the 3 different types of asset protection. The first type of asset protection is simply having an offshore asset in your own name. The second level is having some kind of company structure. And the third level is having some kind of company trust where you're putting the asset out of your control into that trust. And we're going to talk about this using the sort of EKG model that I talked in my book, which you can get on Amazon. If you get this right, not only can you, if you're willing to move, reduce your corporate tax on your business to 0 or near 0, reduce your personal income tax to a predictable sum, be able to move your money anywhere at any time using what I call tunnels, not be restricted by capital controls or dumb new laws, no matter who's in power, have assets protected by people who want to take them from you. Again, that's what we help people do. We like to do it legally. We like to do it ethically. We are the goody two-shoes of the offshore business. But let's go through those 3 different tiers of offshore asset protection, because I think people often overlook like the more entry-level tier, which is just simply having offshore assets in your own name. You can go and open a bank account in another country with as little as $1 in a place like Georgia or Ecuador. And the banking in Georgia is going to be a lot more robust than most of the other places that will take your $1. And you can go up to a couple $100,000 in a place like Singapore and up to high 6 figures or 7 figures and above in a place like Switzerland. There are dozens of countries that offer this. They each have their different pros and cons, but what they all have is that money is no longer in the country. And so I'll give you an example. I've told this story years ago. When I lived in the United States, I had a business. And I moved to California for a business opportunity for 6 months, and then I moved back where I was from. I filed a tax return in both states for that year because, all right, they got me. I was in California long enough. I had to file and I had to pay. And pay I did. I sent them a check. They cashed the check. Then a while later, I woke up one morning and said, why does my business bank account have less money than I remember? Well, what happened was, it's a pretty small amount of money for me now, but the California Franchise Tax Board, the most aggressive tax authority on earth, I would say, decided to levy my bank account. Why? Because I hadn't paid my taxes. Except I had paid them. I literally had the canceled check. They were paid in full, the exact same amount on the tax return, called the accountant. Yep, tax return's accurate. If anything, you probably paid too much. Oh, thanks. And had to ring up the Franchise Tax Board. Had to submit to all of their abuse, and if you don't answer this question, we're going to hang up on you, just to get them on the phone to talk about the mistake they made. And it turns out by the time you went through all that rigmarole and you sat on hold for God knows how many hours and you dealt with their abuse, yeah, you know what, you're right, we did cash your check. I guess we'll have to refund you. Did you get an apology? No. That's not the point. The point is, my money in its entirety was sitting there that anybody can make a fat-fingered mistake. Anybody could make a malicious error. Anyone could do anything. Your money's sitting right there. All it takes is one keystroke. I'm not talking about not paying your taxes. I've always, when I lived in the United States, I paid my taxes. I've always stayed in tax compliance since, even when I owed nothing. And now I pay a little something and I make sure everything is done down to the letter. That's what we do here at Nomad Capitalist. You want to play it straight, as my father would say. But do you want to play it to where when you play it straight, they come and just grab more of your money? And to me, there's so many other situations where this could happen. I think asset protection has to happen in conjunction with citizenship, because if your country passes a law that says, hey, we're taking your retirement account and doing X, Y, Z with it, well, I guess that's the law. And maybe being a citizen of some other country, and potentially only a citizen of some other country at some point, would protect you from that law. So asset protection in a vacuum isn't all that you need. But if your money is sitting in some other country, you can pay your taxes from that country. And I'm not saying to totally move all the money you have out of your country. But what I am saying is have some money somewhere else that whatever bad could happen, whatever black swan event or whatever predictable bad thing could happen, you have money somewhere else that you can pay for that. If you get in trouble, you can pay for a lawyer. If someone comes and takes your money with a fat finger mistake, you can still pay your bills. You can still pay your payroll. Nothing wrong with that. If you're an American, you do have to report your foreign bank accounts, and I suggest you do that. We have tax professionals here that help our clients do that. But having an offshore account in your own name is the first way to protect your assets. That could be a bank account. That could be a brokerage account. You could own stocks overseas. Heck, you could even own U.S. stocks or whatever your country's stocks are in a foreign brokerage account. The big exchanges, you can trade those anywhere. Another way to do this would be to simply own property in your own name. I own a number of homes and pied-à-terres around the world. I didn't set it up for this reason, but there is a benefit that, hey, no matter what happens in some other country, I've got assets in other countries. And if some country decides to go crazy and it gets to the point where they're just taking people's houses, well, I've got other houses to go to. As a result, I don't have to be as emotional about any given place, and I don't have to be as anxious about what could possibly happen under certain administrations. Sure, I'd like everything to work out, and generally it has worked out for me. No one's taken any of my homes yet. No one's taken any of my bank accounts yet. But you always want to be protected, and so you can own property in your own name. And that's just, you have an asset in another country, bank account, brokerage account, property, whatever it may be. It's there. It's a little harder to get to. And sometimes all that matters is having a little deterrent. So you don't always need a complicated structure. For people who are just starting out, those are things you can do with really any amount of money and the assets in your own name. Now, the second thing that you might look at is some kind of holding company structure. This could be not only for asset protection purposes, but for estate tax purposes. So in my case, I don't want to die and owe certain taxes as an individual in countries I don't even live in on investments that I've made. So I can have a holding company. That holding company is not me. I contribute my assets to the holding company. That could be, again, it could be bank accounts. Now, not every bank account is going to open up for a holding company. If you set up a holding company in a very tax neutral, easy to work with jurisdiction, like let's say the British Virgin Islands, you're not going to get most Georgian, probably any Georgian banks or Ecuadorian banks to open for you. You're working with a different type of banks, and they're going to generally want more money. We have some, $5,000, $10,000 is probably the minimum to get something decent, $50,000, $100,000 and up. And so by doing that, you now have separation between you and the assets in the holding company. It is not your asset. Now you are the beneficial owner of that company. You're the owner of the holding company. So it does protect you in some ways. You need to set it up properly. You need to make sure you contribute the assets properly. Again, there may be reporting requirements on this. If you're an American, for example, if you live in certain other countries, you have to report that to your home country in some cases, and you should do that. It also does not, eliminate taxes if you stay living in your country, but it basically puts everything under one net. So, for example, I have certain assets that if I pass away, I don't want them to have to be probated in every single country. It's one thing to have a home in a certain country, but if you have lots of different stocks and shares and investments and ownership in companies, you can put that into one holding company, and then you've got a simple plan for that holding company when you pass away. You may have better estate tax protection. For example, me as a non-U.S. person, a non-U.S. taxpayer, I don't want to die and owe U.S. estate tax on my assets, so I set up a company structure that allows me to avoid that. A lot of people aren't aware that if you own U.S. assets, U.S. situs assets, and you die, in most cases, they're going to take a fat chunk of that above $60,000. And so that's a form of asset protection. But the holding company gives you an extra layer where it's no longer your asset. But what you have to do is you have to set up the company properly and move the assets in properly to where that company can operate on its own. So think of Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. It's a public company, but that is a glorified holding company of a whole bunch of stocks and shares and businesses. And when Warren Buffett's no longer with us, the company will go on. You can have your own very mini version of that, but rather than incorporating it in your country, it may be better to incorporate that in a tax-neutral country somewhere else where their business is making sure your assets are protected. You've got places like Nevis, for example. People have to pay a bond to come after you. And so they make it more difficult. Whereas in the US, everyone can just come after you. Hey, it's a sport, it's a game. And so, if I'm in the United States, hey, I'd like to have some assets protected somewhere else. The final step is an offshore trust. It's no longer your asset. You set up the trust. Again, how you put assets into the trust, it needs to be done properly. And then the trustee handles those assets for you. So some similarities to a holding company, but the trust gives you that extra layer of protection. Some people have the offshore trust own the holding company, and so the trust might own certain things that are more tangible. It might own, gold, for example, and the holding company might own shares. But brokerage accounts, they might open for a holding company, they might open for an offshore trust. They could also open for an individual. So there's tax considerations, there's estate tax considerations, and there's asset protection considerations that go into each of those. And so most people consider the best offshore trust jurisdiction, the Cook Islands. That's going to cost you, a reasonable sum. It's going to have annual maintenance costs, and you're going to talk to the trustee. And yeah, that trustee is in the Cook Islands. So if you're halfway around the world, you're going to be doing some emails or calls late at night. Not the end of the world, but you are. Holding company, you're going to manage that a bit more yourself. There's going to be some ongoing costs. It's going to be lower. Whereas you open an account in your own name, there's nothing to do. But obviously it goes in the reverse, where if you pass away and you have a bank account or a brokerage account or a property that's in your name, that may have to be probated or dealt with in the estate fashion. And in some of these countries, that may take a long, long time. So what some people do is they have holding companies owned by offshore trusts, and then the holding company has other holding companies to where, let's say you own property in a certain country, they don't want your BVI holding company to own the local property. Some countries allow that, but some countries don't. So your BVI holding company might own a local company that owns that property. And depending on what country you're looking at, the conditions for having that sub-holding company may be not worth it, as in you're going to pay yourself directors' salaries and all kinds of monthly audits have to be done. It's probably better to be avoided. Or it could be pretty straightforward and you just pay an annual renewal fee, or not even in some cases, for that sub-holding company. So these structures can get pretty complicated. If you want help doing that, you go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. You can call it a one-stop shop for all things legal tax reduction, second, citizenship to protect your family and your peace of mind, as well as asset protection to protect what is yours. We do it all under one roof. We have the lawyers, we have the tax professionals, we have all the people in the network. We create a holistic plan that works across all the different jurisdictions, so you really only have to go one place. Met an old client of ours. It was a client 3 or 4 years ago, left pretty happy, came back up to me in the street and said, I got to come back to you because I keep calling these guys who sell asset protection stuff, and the Malta guy only wants to pitch me on Malta. Is Malta the best? I don't know, but that's all he sells. So he said, I want to come back and get a holistic plan. You're going to hear a lot of people saying holistic plan, holistic plan, holistic plan. There's a reason that people want to work for Nomad Capitalist, and very few people leave Nomad Capitalist once they're in, because we originated the holistic plan. You go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We'll be happy to help you. Now, let's go through a couple things you need to have in mind for your asset protection plan. How do these things actually help you in the end? Number one, if you have a company, where's the company headquarters? Where is it incorporated for not only low tax, but also for safety, right? If you hear me say, hey, you could move to Mexico, you could move to Thailand, you could move to Montenegro, I'm not saying move your company there. Your company should be in, generally speaking, a tax-neutral jurisdiction, and it should be in a jurisdiction that respects your ability to keep your own stuff. They respect asset protection. They respect some level of privacy. It's much lower than it used to be. I mean, we're not here to hide our stuff, but we are here to maybe not have someone find our home address. Have a good company headquarters. Where can you incorporate? It's probably not a place you're going to live. British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Hong Kong, Belize if you're a little desperate, the Marshall Islands for some limited scope of companies. Okay, Switzerland occasionally works. We've got about, I think, 17 or 18 different jurisdictions that we primarily work with, and we've got all the kind of avatar pros and cons in our system. You also want Boltholes for bad stuff happening, so another home. I like to own properties around the world, not only for lifestyle reasons, but when bad stuff happens, like a pandemic or God knows what else, I have somewhere to go. Bank accounts, you can have tunnels. So have bolt holes, and you can always build the bolt hole out. You can have a home in a country that you go to 1 week a year on a holiday, and if things get bad enough, you could always lever that up to 6 months a year. Right? Bank account, you could open with $1,000, but there's not a maximum deposit. You'd always put more money in there if you wanted to, right? So I'll often open bank accounts, and I'll say, oh, it's the minimum, it's $100,000. Okay, you put that in. And then, later, if you want to put in $5 million, whether it's, permanently or temporarily, you could do that. One area where I think people get confused on this is, the defensive bolt holes. It doesn't have to be a place that you necessarily agree with all their policies. There are people who say, oh, Hong Kong, that's part of China. Hong Kong still wants to be a place where capital comes and capital is respected. The UAE, the same thing. Now, I don't like their new 9% tax. If you're not living there, I don't know why you'd pay a 9% tax. If you are living there, you make the choice. You may not agree with those countries' entire policies. Doesn't mean they don't want your capital. Doesn't mean they may not be places to consider. Now, the second angle for asset protection is lifestyle. Where do you live? I think, quite frankly, If you're living in a place like the US, it's a minefield there. Now, are you going to move just to avoid that? No, you can buy insurance, you can do all kinds of things, including asset protection, including offshore asset protection. But from a cultural perspective, I like to live in places where people get along a bit more and things are a bit more laissez-faire and things are a bit more organic. Where do you want to live? I think that plays a role in your asset protection plan. US persons especially are at a disadvantage. And then the last thing is growth. You can engage in asset protection to actually grow your money. And so there's markets that you may not ever want to live in, but your money can grow. I mean, you've seen a couple great standout Latin American stocks. Obviously, Asia has a lot of hot stocks. I mean, there's places you can put your money where you're diversifying it, but you also could have greater profit potential. And so if you look at defensive asset protection, but also factor in lifestyle and growth, I think those three things can work together collectively, and that can work together in tandem with what assets do you have in your own name, and that's always a study of where are you going to go? Which countries are you buying those assets in? What are you going to have in a holding company? Again, stocks and intangibles better there perhaps. What might you have in a trust? And how do you know, you can open, again, in your own name, any type of account with any amount of money. Holding company, you probably need a little bit of money, but you can do that relatively early. Trust, I think once you're at the 7-figure level in terms of net worth, a trust, makes sense. May not be as valuable if you have a couple $100,000. Not giving you financial advice on that. That's just personally what I would have done. So those are the formulas that you can follow for how do you lay your money out in different areas. Again, most people that you're going to talk to, they're going to focus on domestic asset protection. We'll do this, we'll do that. Hey, you're only one wrong move in your own country from whomever it may be, from a lawmaker, from a judge, who knows, from everything being taken. And so I think that's why distributing things around the world while still acting ethically and while still fulfilling all of your legal obligations is the smartest thing you can do to make sure you always have some sense of control, and no matter what bad happens, you at least can deal with that.